The room was alive with chatter and laughter, the kind that comes from people who are used to comfort and wealth. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the polished marble floor, casting a warm glow over the tables dressed in fine linens and sparkling glassware. The air smelled faintly of perfume and expensive cologne, mixed with the scent of roasted meats and delicate pastries. Music played softly in the background, but it was nothing more than a gentle hum compared to the excitement that seemed to ripple through the crowd. Among the guests, dressed in tailored suits and elegant gowns, she moved quietly. She was a waitress, one of the many tasked with making sure glasses were filled, plates were cleared, and smiles were kept polite. Her uniform was plain, nothing like the fine clothes that surrounded her, but it was clean and neat, and she wore it with pride. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years on her feet, balancing trays and stepping lightly to avoid disturbing the guests. She was small, almost fragile-looking, but there was a steadiness in her movements that made her seem invisible yet reliable at the same time. It was one of those nights where the difference between the guests and the staff was stark. The guests laughed at jokes they made themselves, sipped wine from delicate glasses, and occasionally glanced at their phones or watches, as if counting the minutes until something more exciting happened. The staff, on the other hand, moved like shadows, silent, careful, present but unnoticed. She carried a tray filled with glasses of sparkling water and soft drinks, weaving her way between the tables with a smile that was polite but measured. She had long ago learned that people noticed only what they wanted to notice. Then it happened. The host of the evening, a man with a loud laugh and a sharp suit, stood near the grand piano that rested in one corner of the room. Its black surface gleamed under the chandelier lights, the ivory keys pristine and polished. He clapped his hands together, drawing attention to himself. The room quieted slightly. Curiosity piqued. "Let's have some fun," he said, his voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation. "I want to see if anyone here has hidden talent. And why not start with someone who might surprise us?" His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. She was bending slightly to place a glass on a low table near the center of the room, unaware that she was being watched. The host's smile grew wider, and he gestured toward the piano. "You," he said, pointing directly at her. "Yes, you. Come play for us. Let's see if you have what it takes." The crowd laughed, the kind of laughter that is meant to amuse at someone else's expense. It wasn't mean-spirited exactly, but it was the laughter of expectation. They expected her to fumble, to make a fool of herself, to provide a momentary entertainment before they returned to their drinks and conversations. She froze for a moment, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. All eyes were on her now. The murmurs of the room faded as people leaned in, waiting for the spectacle. She placed the tray down carefully, taking a deep breath. Her heart was racing. She had never been asked or told to play in front of anyone, let alone a room full of strangers who were dressed in their finest clothes, expecting something ridiculous. Her first instinct was to decline, to step back and let someone else be the source of amusement. But then she felt something else, a small, quiet voice inside her that said she could. She could play if she wanted to. With a slow, deliberate step, she walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, the polished floor reflecting her hesitant movements. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, judging, waiting, imagining her failure. But there was also a strange kind of courage building inside her, a determination to see what she could do, even if just for herself. Guests whispered among themselves as she approached. Some were still laughing, some were raising eyebrows in curiosity. A few were genuinely interested, though that interest was tempered by the assumption that nothing remarkable would happen. The host, sensing the tension, leaned back with a smug smile convinced he was about to orchestrate a harmless spectacle at her expense. She reached the piano and paused. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, unsure if she should play or just turn around and retreat. The room held its collective breath. A waiter who had been nearby froze mid-step, and even the soft music in the background seemed to vanish under the weight of expectation. The guests leaned in, some smirking, some rolling their eyes, anticipating the entertainment they were promised. Then she let her hands settle on the keys. Not in haste, not in panic, but with a quiet confidence that surprised even her. The first note she played was soft, delicate, and perfectly clear. It cut through the air of expectation like a sudden, cool breeze. The laughter that had been rising from the crowd faded into confused murmurs. No one expected that. No one anticipated a note. It sounded right, real, full of meaning. Her second note followed naturally, and then a third. It was as though the piano had been waiting for her all this time, ready to sing under her touch. Her fingers moved carefully, deliberately, almost instinctively, creating a melody that was simple but beautiful. It was not flashy or showy, just pure music, honest and compelling. The room, once filled with chatter and amusement, grew quiet. The guests leaned forward, their attention captured despite themselves. She could feel the eyes on her, but they no longer carried ridicule. They carried surprise, confusion, a sort of admiration that was quietly growing. The host, who had expected mockery and amusement, was now watching with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. He leaned forward, studying her hands, trying to understand how someone he had deemed a joke could produce something so right. She took a deep breath, letting the air flow naturally as her fingers danced lightly across the keys. The music grew richer, fuller, weaving through the room like a gentle wave. It was not loud or aggressive. It did not demand attention. It earned it. People shifted in their seats, some instinctively leaning in closer, as if trying to catch every note. The polished floors, the fine linens, the crystal chandeliers, all the symbols of wealth and status seemed to fade away. The only thing that mattered was the music and the person creating it. Her heart beat fast, but not in fear. There was a thrill in the act of creation, a quiet joy that came from giving something real to others. The guests, initially ready to mock, began to listen. Eyes softened, mouths closed, and even the subtle whispering stopped. For the first time that evening, there was genuine connection in the room, a shared experience between her and every person present, regardless of status or wealth. She played a few more notes, letting the melody flow naturally from her hands. She had not planned it, had not practiced it for this audience. This was music born from memory, from feeling, from the small piano she had grown up with in a modest home. Every note carried a story, a piece of her life, and somehow it touched everyone in the room. The laughter, the chatter, the snickers, they were all gone. In their place was silence, thick with attention and awe. The guests had come expecting entertainment. They had received art. The host, for the first time in the evening, was speechless. He had intended to orchestrate a joke, but he had become the audience for something far greater than amusement. She played on, the melody rising and falling, simple yet profound. She could feel the shift in the room, the change in energy. The elite crowd, accustomed to being entertained, were now completely captivated. Their eyes followed her hands, their minds processing the unexpected talent before them. The contrast between her plain uniform and the elegance of her music created a tension that was impossible to ignore. As the first part of her performance came to a close, she paused for a moment, letting the last note linger in the air. It was a quiet note, but it held weight, a presence that filled the room. The guests exhaled slowly, some still caught in the spell of what they had just heard. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the host, who had orchestrated this moment for amusement, was frozen in a state of disbelief. For her, this pause was a moment of clarity. She had stepped into a room filled with expectations and judgment, and she had emerged with something real and beautiful. She realized that the music was not about proving herself to them. It was about being true to her own skill, her own passion, and her own voice. The room might have been filled with wealth and status, but for this moment, none of that mattered. Only the music mattered. The guests shifted in their seats, unsure what to do next. Some were smiling faintly, some were blinking rapidly, trying to process what had just happened. The laughter and snickering had vanished completely, replaced by a quiet, awestruck energy that hung over the room like a gentle cloud. They had come expecting a spectacle, and they had received something far more significant. A glimpse into the power of talent and courage combined. She moved her hand slightly, ready to continue, but in that pause, she realized something important. She had already made her mark, even if she did not yet know how far this moment would reach. For the first time that evening, she felt truly seen, not as a waitress, not as someone to be laughed at, but as a person capable of creating beauty and touching hearts. The room waited, and in that moment, she understood that what had begun as a simple act of courage, the act of stepping up to the piano, was already transforming the evening in ways that no one could. She paused for a moment, letting the soft vibration of the piano's last note linger in the room. The silence that followed was heavy, almost alive. For a brief second, she felt the eyes of everyone in the room resting on her, and it wasn't the mocking stare she had feared. It was something different. It was curiosity, mixed with surprise, with a hint of admiration that she wasn't expecting. She could feel it pressing gently, like the warmth of sunlight on her face. It made her breath catch slightly, but not in fear. There was excitement in it too, a thrill that had nothing to do with applause or recognition. It was the thrill of love. Being seen, truly seen, in a way that had never happened before. Her hands hovered over the keys again, almost instinctively. She wasn't sure what to play next. There was no sheet music, no careful plan. All she had was the melody that had been living in her head for years, the one she had played countless times in her small, quiet room at home, when no one was listening. That melody was full of memories, full of the little joys and sorrows of a life that no one here could have imagined. She began to play, slowly at first, letting her fingers find the familiar path across the keys. Each note felt like a small act of courage, a step further into something unknown doubt. As she played, the room seemed to shift around her. The guests who had been so sure of what would happen were leaning forward, their eyes fixed on her hands, as if they could understand her story through the music. The laughter and chatter from a few minutes ago seemed like a distant memory. Even the host, who had orchestrated this moment as a joke, was still leaning forward, silent, his face a mixture of astonishment and disbelief. He had expected her to fumble, to provide a brief, amusing moment, and yet here she was, commanding the room with nothing but her talent. The notes she played were soft but firm, simple but deeply expressive. She let them flow naturally, allowing the music to breathe and grow, to rise and fall like waves. Each chord seemed to carry a little piece of her life, the long hours she had spent practicing in secret, the sacrifices she had made to support herself, the quiet moments of hope that had kept her going when things felt impossible. There was a story in every note, a story that spoke of resilience and hidden strength. She noticed some of the guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They weren't sure how to react. They had come expecting entertainment, and now they were experiencing something much deeper. Some of the men and women who had been poised and confident moments ago now looked uncertain, moved in a way that revealed their vulnerability. For many of them, this was unfamiliar territory. They were used to controlling the environment, controlling the people around them, but here was someone who had taken control in the most subtle, undeniable way. Her fingers moved more confidently. Now, her body relaxed as she became fully immersed in the music. She stopped thinking about the audience, about their expectations, about the laughter that had preceded her performance. She was no longer the waitress who had been chosen as the subject of a joke. She was simply a musician, a human being expressing herself through sound. The room responded to her, almost instinctively. There was a quiet energy, a sense of connection that she could feel in the air, like a gentle current running through everyone present. She glanced up briefly, and her eyes met those of a few guests. Some were staring with wide eyes, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. Others had tears in their eyes, subtle but unmistakable. The music seemed to touch something deep within them, something they rarely let surface in public. It wasn't about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about something human, something real. And for a moment, she felt a strange sense of intimacy with people she had never met. As if the music had bridged a gap that words never could, the host cleared his throat softly, trying to regain some semblance of control over the evening. But it was useless. The room was hers now, if only for a moment. He realized, with a mixture of irritation and awe, that his plan to create amusement had completely backfired. He had set out to make her a source of entertainment, but she had turned it into something far more powerful. She had made them all witnesses to her talent and her courage. The melody grew more intricate, not in a showy way, but in a way that revealed the depth of her understanding of the instrument. Each note was deliberate, each pause purposeful. She wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to express, to share a part of herself that few people had ever heard. It was honest music, and there was something magnetic about honesty in a world that often demanded performance and pretense. People could sense it, and they were captivated. She noticed a few guests whispering to each other, their voices low and uncertain. They were trying to process what was happening, trying to understand how someone who had seemed so ordinary, so unassuming, could create something so extraordinary. Some of them leaned closer, not out of curiosity, but out of a need to witness the skill firsthand. It was as if they needed to see her hands moving across the keys to believe that what they were hearing was real. The room was full of contrasts. On one side, there was wealth, elegance, and status. On the other side, there was her, a simple waitress, in a plain uniform, yet commanding attention with her music in a way that no money or influence could replicate. The juxtaposition was striking, and it made her performance feel even more powerful. She was proof that talent and courage could exist anywhere, that the human spirit could shine in the most unexpected places. Her confidence continued to grow as she played. She was no longer thinking about the audience's judgment or expectations. She was immersed in the rhythm and flow of the music, letting her hands move naturally over the keys. Each note was an extension of her thoughts and feelings, a small revelation of her inner world. She could feel the music rising and falling, shaping the atmosphere of the room in subtle but profound ways. A few guests shifted in their seats, unable to look away. They were captivated, drawn into the story she was telling through sound. Some were wiping their eyes discreetly, moved by the raw emotion in her playing. Others were leaning forward, fascinated by the precision and control she demonstrated. It was as if the music had created a temporary world where only the notes and emotions existed, and everyone else was simply an observer, connected by the shared experience. Even the staff in the room noticed the change. Other waiters and assistants, who had been quietly going about their tasks, paused for a moment to watch her play. They had seen her at work countless times, but they had never seen this side of her, the side that could captivate and command attention without saying a word. For them, it was a revelation, a reminder that people were often more than what they appeared to be. As she continued, her movements became more fluid, her expression calm but focused. She was no longer nervous. She was alive in a way she hadn't experienced before. There was a connection forming, almost tangible, between her and the audience. Every note, every chord was a bridge between her inner world and theirs. The room was silent, save for the music, yet it was full of unspoken understanding and shared emotion. The host watched, trying to hide his astonishment, but it was impossible. He had expected laughter and mockery, and instead he witnessed something remarkable. He realized that his plan to entertain had become secondary to the performance unfolding before him. He couldn't help but admire her skill, even if he would never admit it out loud. There was an authenticity in her playing that transcended the casual elegance of the room, a reminder that talent and courage could disrupt expectations in the most profound way. She felt herself relax further, letting the music carry her. She wasn't counting measures or thinking about tempo. She was listening, responding, allowing the piano to become an extension of her own voice. The notes flowed seamlessly, creating a melody that was simple yet profound, delicate yet powerful. She was fully immersed, and in doing so, she drew everyone in with her. Some guests had stopped moving entirely, mesmerized by the performance. Their eyes followed her hands, trying to capture every subtle movement. Their minds were quiet, focused solely on the sound, on the emotion that she was conveying without words. It was a rare and intimate moment, shared by people who would normally be strangers, but now connected by the music and the courage of the person playing it. Time seemed to stretch and bend around her. Minutes passed, but it felt longer, almost suspended, as if the room had entered a different rhythm, dictated by her hands and the keys beneath them. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a storyteller, an artist, a human being revealing herself to the world in the most honest way possible. As the melody reached a quiet, introspective section, she allowed herself to breathe. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, fear, exhilaration, but they were all tempered by a calm sense of purpose. She wasn't playing for anyone's approval. She was playing because it was her way of communicating, of sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. The audience, sensing this, leaned in even more, as if they could feel the emotion radiating from her hands and her heart. A few more notes, soft and deliberate, filled the room. She let each one linger, savoring the sound, the feeling it created. She could feel the energy of the audience shifting, a subtle but powerful acknowledgement of what she was giving them. It was not applause yet, but it was Rico. She could feel the room leaning in, though no one moved a muscle. It was as if the air itself had changed, filled with a kind of quiet intensity that had never been there before. Every eye was on her, not in judgment now, but in anticipation, in wonder. She had played a few notes, enough to capture attention, enough to show them a glimpse of what she could do, but she wasn't finished. There was a story she wanted to tell through the piano, one that had been building in her mind for years, a story that words could never capture fully. Her hands hovered above the keys, feeling the smooth surface, the cool touch of the ivory beneath. Her fingers. There was a moment of hesitation, almost like holding her breath before a dive. But then she pressed down gently, and the first note rang out, clear and resonant. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it had weight, presence. She let it linger, letting the sound settle in the room before moving to the next. With each note, melody began to unfold, delicate yet purposeful, soft yet firm. She could feel the music flowing through her, carrying not just sound, but emotion, memory, and a part of herself she had rarely shared. The guests were silent now, captivated in a way that left no room for distraction. There were some who still held a faint trace of doubt in their eyes, as if expecting her to falter, but even they could not deny the power of what they were hearing. The laughter and murmurs from earlier had vanished completely, replaced by an almost sacred attention. It was a quiet that spoke volumes, a stillness that said, "This matters." She moved through the keys carefully, deliberately. Each chord was placed with intention, each pause measured yet natural. She didn't rush. There was no hurry to impress or to finish quickly. She was telling a story, and stories cannot be hurried. They unfold in their own time, and this one needed space to breathe. The music flowed like a river, sometimes gentle and calm, sometimes rising slightly, full of energy and movement, always guided by her hands and her heart. A few of the guests leaned forward, their expressions shifting as they tried to process the unexpected talent before them. Some were blinking rapidly, trying to hold back tears, while others stared with mouths slightly open, caught between disbelief and admiration. Even the host, who had orchestrated the moment for his own amusement, could only watch. There was a mixture of astonishment and quiet humility in his expression, an acknowledgement that he had underestimated her completely. She noticed a woman in the front row, her hand clasped over her chest, as if to contain a sudden rush of emotion. The way she watched, completely absorbed, reminded her that music could connect people in ways words never could. She played on, letting the melody deepen, grow more intricate without becoming overwhelming. There was balance in her fingers, a careful harmony between precision and freedom, between control and expression. It was effortless to the eye, though the effort and practice behind it were immeasurable. The room seemed to breathe with her, each note creating a subtle movement in the air, a ripple through the gathered crowd. The chandeliers reflected light differently now, sparkling in a way that seemed almost in rhythm with her playing. The polished floor caught the glow of the instruments and the guests, the reflections dancing lightly across the space. For a moment, the physical details of the room, the expensive glasses, the fine linens, the carefully arranged tables faded into the background. Only the music mattered. She allowed herself to remember the small piano in the corner of her childhood home, the one that had been battered and scratched from years of practice. She remembered sitting there for hours, pressing the keys, learning the feel of the instrument, discovering how to make it sing. Those quiet, private moments had shaped her more than any performance ever could. And now, all those years of practice, of patience, of small victories and mistakes, were coming together in this room, in front of these people who had expected little and were now witnessing something extraordinary. The melody shifted slightly, taking on a richer, fuller tone. Her fingers moved faster, not in a rush, but in a fluid, natural progression. Each note added depth, complexity, and emotion, building on what had come before. It was a delicate balance, a dance between control and freedom, precision and feeling. She could feel herself getting lost in it, and that was exactly how she wanted it to be. Music, after all, is not just something you play, it's something you become. The guests were leaning in now, caught completely by the rhythm and flow of her performance. There was no whispering, no shifting in chairs, no casual glances at watches. For the first time in this space, everyone was fully present. People who had arrived expecting entertainment were instead experiencing something intimate, almost personal. There was a quiet sense of awe, an unspoken respect, as if they knew that what they were hearing was something rare and beautiful. She could feel the energy in the room, changing. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about connection. Each note she played carried not just her skill, but her emotion, her experience, her humanity. It reached the guests in a way that words could not, touching something deep inside them. She could see it in the way some of them held themselves a little differently, the way a few had their hands clasped tightly, the way some exhaled slowly, as if the music had taken a weight off their shoulders. Her heart beat steadily now, in time with the rhythm of her own melody. There was no fear, no hesitation, only the flow of sound and feeling. She allowed herself to close her eyes briefly, not to hide, but to focus, to feel every note, every vibration. The room seemed to shrink around her and expand at the same time. She was both entirely alone and entirely surrounded, a paradox that made her playing even more powerful. The host finally cleared his throat softly, perhaps in an attempt to regain control, but it was futile. This was no longer his spectacle. This was hers. She could feel the shift in authority without needing to acknowledge it directly. The room had given itself over to her performance, fully and without reservation. And she played with that awareness, letting it guide her, but never letting it dominate her. The music remained true to her intention, pure and expressive. The melody took on a slightly wistful tone now, a softer, more introspective feel. It was a gentle reminder that even in beauty there can be vulnerability. Her hands moved lightly, each note deliberate, but imbued with subtle emotion. It was a sound that asked for attention without demanding it, that drew people in naturally, almost effortlessly. The guests responded without realizing it, their breathing slowing, their postures shifting subtly, their eyes focused on the pianist as if they could absorb the story. She was telling directly into their hearts. She remembered her early performances. At home, when no one watched, when she played just for herself. Those small, private moments had taught her more than any public performance ever could. She had learned patience, control, and the ability to listen to the music instead of forcing it. Those lessons were alive in her hands now, guiding her fingers across the keys, shaping every note and chord with quiet authority. The audience was completely silent, yet the silence was not empty. It was full of attention, full of emotion, full of unspoken understanding. Some people shifted slightly in their chairs, unsure how to contain the feelings that were surfacing. Others simply sat, frozen in their seats, captivated by the elegance, the honesty, and the intensity of her performance. It was a moment that transcended ordinary experience, a moment suspended in time, shared by people who had arrived as strangers, and were now connected through something invisible but powerful. Her fingers danced lightly, almost effortlessly, over the keys. Each movement was deliberate, yet it carried a sense of spontaneity, as if the music was discovering itself in real time. She let the notes flow, rising and falling naturally, creating a wave that moved through the room in subtle, invisible ways. The melody was not rushed, not forced, but allowed to breathe and exist in its own space. And the room responded. A few guests leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the subtle shifts in tone, by the way she made each note meaningful. Others had their eyes closed, absorbing the music in a deeply personal way, letting it wash over them, carrying them to a quiet, contemplative place. It was remarkable to witness the way sound could alter a room, change the energy, and touch people's hearts without a single word being spoken. She felt a quiet pride, not in herself, but in the connection she was creating. She wasn't performing to impress or gain recognition. She was performing because it was a natural extension of herself, an offering to anyone willing to listen. And listen they were. She could feel it in the tension of their bodies, in the intensity of their gaze, in the subtle expressions on their faces. They were present in a way that few people ever experienced, and she was giving them that gift simply by being herself and letting the music flow. The melody became richer, more layered, without losing its simplicity. She moved through chords that were familiar yet fresh, weaving in small flourishes that carried emotion and depth. Each note had meaning, each pause had purpose, and every phrase was an invitation to listen, to feel, to connect. It was an intimate conversation without words, a shared experience that was rare and precious. She noticed a few of the guests exchanging glances, subtle acknowledgments of what was happening. Some were smiling faintly, others blinking rapidly, struggling. The room had fallen into a quiet that was almost sacred. Every guest sat in stunned silence, their attention entirely captured by the music flowing from the piano. Even the soft clinking of glasses, the faint rustle of fabric, and the distant hum of conversations outside seemed to vanish. It was as if time had slowed down, allowing the music to take full control, filling every corner of the room with its presence. She could feel it herself, the way the notes lingered, touching not just the ears, but the hearts of everyone listening. Her hands moved with a grace that came from years of quiet practice, from hours spent alone in rooms that smelled faintly of polished wood and sunlight. Each movement was deliberate, yet natural, a perfect balance between control and freedom. She wasn't thinking about the audience anymore, about their expectations, or even about how impressive she sounded. She was lost in the music, allowing it to flow through her, guiding her fingers, shaping her expression, and telling a story that no words could ever convey. The audience was mesmerized. Some had their eyes fixed on her hands, following every subtle movement, every delicate press of a key. Others sat back, eyes closed, allowing the music to wash over them, feeling it ripple through their bodies and minds. The wealth, the status, the elegance of the room, all of it faded into insignificance. In that moment, there was only the music, the pianist, and the shared human experience that was unfolding between them. She let herself slow down for a moment, letting a soft chord hang in the air. It wasn't just a pause in the music, it was a moment for breathing, for reflection, for letting the energy of the room settle into her rhythm. And the room responded. There was a shift in the audience, subtle but noticeable. People leaned forward slightly, some unconsciously holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the delicate balance that had formed. Even the host, who had planned the night with so much control and expectation, seemed to shrink into the background, powerless to interfere. With a gentle touch, she began again. The notes were softer now, more introspective, almost fragile. There was vulnerability in her playing, a sense of honesty that struck a chord in everyone present. It was the kind of sound that made people remember moments in their own lives, small, quiet memories they had long forgotten, the bittersweet blend of joy and sorrow that everyone carries inside. Some guests blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Others pressed their palms to their faces, overwhelmed by the emotion that had quietly invaded the room. Her mind wandered briefly, thinking of the countless days she had spent practicing, alone, imagining audiences that might never exist. She remembered the discouragement, the moments when she thought her talent would go unnoticed forever. And yet, here she was, surrounded by people who had never seen her before, feeling the full impact of every note she played. It was overwhelming in its own way, but it was also exhilarating, a validation of every effort she had ever made. The melody shifted again, becoming richer, deeper. She allowed herself to add small flourishes, tiny embellishments that gave the music a sense of movement and life. The audience responded instinctively. They leaned in, some craning their necks slightly, trying to catch every detail. Others closed their eyes again, letting the sound reach places words never could. It was a strange and beautiful energy, one that could not be manufactured or faked. It was raw, real human dot. She noticed a few people exchanging glances, their expressions, a mix of awe and disbelief. Some whispered to each other quietly, but even their whispers seemed absorbed into the music. They were trying to make sense of what they were experiencing, trying to understand how someone they had underestimated so completely could produce something so powerful. The contrast was astonishing. On one side, a world of wealth, experience, and sophistication. On the other, A young woman in a simple uniform, creating magic with nothing but her hands and the keys. Her hands continued their journey across the piano, moving faster now, not in a rush, but in a natural progression. The melody built subtly, weaving in and out of itself, creating patterns and rhythms that were both intricate and accessible. She could feel the emotion in the room growing, thickening, becoming almost tangible. Every note she played carried a piece of her life, a piece of her heart, a piece of herself she had never shared so openly before. And the audience felt it. A man at the back of the room leaned slightly forward, his hand tightening around the edge of his chair. His eyes were wide, fixed on her hands as they danced across the keys. He had come expecting entertainment, a laugh, a light-hearted moment to break the monotony of his evening. Instead, he was witnessing a transformation. The young woman before him had taken the room hostage, not with force or showmanship, but with something far rarer: authenticity, courage, and undeniable talent. The music grew even more expressive, shifting between highs and lows, bright moments and somber tones. She let herself follow the emotion, letting it dictate her hands, letting it guide the story she was telling. The audience followed as well, drawn into the ebb and flow of the melody. Some leaned closer, as if proximity could enhance the connection. Others closed their eyes, allowing the sound to reach deep within them, carrying them to places they hadn't visited in years. It was remarkable to see how the room had changed. The atmosphere, once filled with casual laughter and polite conversation, was now charged with a shared human experience. People who had come expecting spectacle were now completely absorbed, caught in the web of her music. There was no hierarchy, no status, no division between the wealthy guests and the young waitress. For a few minutes, all that mattered was this moment, this music, this human connection. She allowed a gentle pause to enter, letting a single note linger in the air. It hung there, quiet and deliberate, as if inviting the room to reflect, to breathe, to take in the weight of what had been shared. The guests shifted slightly, almost instinctively. Some exhaled slowly, feeling the tension release. Others leaned forward, their expressions softened by the intimacy of the moment. It was a pause that spoke louder than words, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty that had been created. Her hands moved again, this time more boldly. She introduced chords that were fuller, richer, more commanding. Yet there was no arrogance, no need to show off. The music was confident, because she was confident, grounded in her experience, in her understanding of the instrument, in her honesty. It carried authority, but it also carried warmth, compassion, and humanity. Every note invited the audience in, creating a bridge between her inner world and theirs. A few of the guests were visibly moved. One woman dabbed at the corner of her eye, trying to hide the tears she hadn't realized had formed. A man shifted in his chair, clearly holding back emotion. Even the host, who had orchestrated the moment as a joke, could not hide the effect the performance was having. His expression softened, a quiet respect replacing the smug amusement he had worn earlier. He realized that what was unfolding before him was far beyond anything he had anticipated. The room seemed to vibrate with attention, each person caught in their own personal response to the music. Some were captivated by the technical skill, the flawless execution of each chord and note. Others were captivated by the emotion, by the raw honesty that emanated from her fingers and heart. And some were captivated simply by the fact that someone they had underestimated so completely could command such power without a word, without pretense, without effort. She felt a growing sense of liberation as she played. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a release, a celebration of everything she had been through, everything she had learned, everything she had dared to dream. Each note was a testament to perseverance, to courage, to the quiet strength of a human spirit, determined to be heard. She could feel it radiating through the room, connecting everyone present in ways that words could never achieve. The melody shifted again, becoming more complex, weaving in minor and major chords, rising and falling with a natural elegance. She allowed herself to become fully absorbed, letting the music guide her rather than forcing it. Her body relaxed, her hands flowed effortlessly, and her mind was entirely focused on the story she was telling. And the audience followed, entranced, as if they had no choice but to be drawn into the world she was creating. There was a subtle rhythm emerging now, a gentle pulse that seemed to sync with the collective heartbeat of the room. Guests unconsciously adjusted their posture, their breathing, aligning themselves with the ebb and flow of the music. It was a shared moment, unspoken but deeply understood, a fleeting connection between strangers brought together by a single human voice expressed through the piano. She could feel the energy shifting even more, becoming almost electric. There was an intensity in the attention, a heightened sensitivity to every nuance, every delicate variation in tempo and tone. The audience had completely surrendered to the experience, letting it wash over them, letting it shape their perception of the room, of the evening, of the person at the piano. The performance had become a conduit, a bridge, a shared human experience that transcended class, status, and expectation. Her fingers danced lightly, flowing across the keys with a mix of precision and intuition. Each note was a declaration, each pause a reflection. She felt herself expanding, reaching deeper into the music, pulling from. The room was completely still, yet it vibrated with energy that only music could create. Every guest sat frozen in their seats, their eyes fixed on the piano, their ears drinking in each note as though it were something rare, something they had never expected to experience. She could feel it, the connection, the unspoken understanding that the music had built. It was a quiet kind of magic, one that needed no words, no applause, no recognition. It existed simply in the sound, in the hands that made it, and in the hearts that listened. Her fingers moved over the keys with grace, each one pressing down with intention, each chord forming naturally, seamlessly, effortlessly. She wasn't thinking about the audience, about their reaction, or about the wealth and status of the people surrounding her. She was lost in the music, letting it flow through her, guiding her hands, shaping her emotions into sound. Each note carried a part of her hopes, her fears, her dreams, her quiet moments of joy and sorrow, and the audience felt it, without even realizing. She glanced briefly at the crowd, and what she saw made her pause, just for a heartbeat. There were people wiping at the corners of their eyes, some pressing their hands against their chests, others simply staring with mouths slightly open, caught in a mixture of disbelief and awe. The host, who had initially orchestrated this moment as a light-hearted joke, sat back, his expression unreadable but tense, a mixture of astonishment and humility crossing his face. He had underestimated her completely, and it was clear to everyone. In the room, the music swelled gently, carrying with it a story of quiet resilience and hidden strength. She allowed her fingers to explore the keys with a freedom that was both controlled and expressive. She had spent countless hours alone, practicing in rooms where no one could hear her, refining her skill until it became second nature. Those long hours, filled with dedication and patience, had prepared her for this moment, even if she hadn't realized it. The years of quiet effort were now making themselves known, spilling out in every chord, every delicate pause, every subtle variation. In tone, the audience leaned forward instinctively, as if proximity could somehow draw them deeper into the music. The melody rose and fell, sometimes soft and introspective, sometimes stronger and more assertive, each shift carrying emotion that words could never capture. Some of the guests closed their eyes, letting the music reach inside them, feeling. It touched places long forgotten, or hidden away. Others watched intently, trying to understand the skill, the courage, the life experience that had produced such a performance. She noticed a few whispers spreading quietly across the room, though no one dared interrupt the flow of the music. "Can you believe she's a waitress?" one voice murmured. "She's incredible," another said, barely audible but full of awe. The words didn't matter. The music had already said more than they ever could. It had told a story that reached beyond social status, wealth, or expectation. A story about talent, courage, and the power of being fully oneself. Her hands moved faster now, but still with control. The melody became more intricate, weaving layers of sound that were both beautiful and emotionally complex. She allowed herself to be fully immersed, letting every feeling, every memory, every hope and fear shape the music. She wasn't just playing notes. She was communicating, expressing, sharing a part of her life that had been private for too long. And the audience responded, some unconsciously holding their breath, some subtly leaning forward, others letting small tears fall. Unnoticed, the room was alive, though quietly so. It was a living energy that came from human hearts, recognizing the authenticity in what they were witnessing. The chandeliers above reflected light differently now, catching on the polished surface of the piano and the tiny beads of moisture, forming on some guests' faces. Every corner of the room seemed to vibrate with subtle resonance, the energy of hundreds of people drawn together by the same sound, by the same story unfolding in real time. She allowed a pause to enter the music, letting a single chord ring and fade slowly. The silence was profound, almost reverent, and it held the room in a gentle grip. She could feel the energy shifting subtly as the audience processed what they had just experienced. No one spoke, no one moved, yet everything had changed. The casual conversations and laughter from earlier nights felt impossibly distant now. This was something entirely different, something unforgettable. When she began again, the music took on a slightly bolder tone. She pressed the keys with a quiet confidence, letting the melody rise and fall, giving space to each note, allowing it to breathe. The subtle changes in rhythm, the gentle shifts between major and minor, the light touches and firm chords, all of it combined to create a narrative that was as much about feeling as it was about technique. The audience could sense it, even if they didn't understand exactly how or why. It was real, and it was powerful. Her fingers moved over the keys, as if telling a story without words, a story that was both personal and universal. Each note carried weight, each pause a significance beyond measure. She had become a storyteller, using the piano as her voice, translating emotions and experiences into sound. And the guests were listening, completely absorbed, unable to tear themselves away, unable to doubt the power of what they were witnessing. Some of the guests were visibly emotional now. A few dabbed at their eyes. Others pressed hands to their faces, trying to absorb the feeling without letting it overwhelm them. The wealth and status that usually defined the room mattered little in this moment. What mattered was the human connection, the recognition of talent, of courage, of honesty, of the power to touch hearts through art. The young woman at the piano had reminded them of something they often forgot, that true expression doesn't care about social hierarchy, and beauty can emerge from the most unexpected places. Her hands moved more freely now, dancing across the keys with ease and purpose. Each note seemed to have a life of its own, rising and falling naturally, carrying the room along with it. She allowed the music to grow louder, more intense, not for the sake of showmanship, but because it reflected the depth of feeling she wanted to convey. It was not about impressing the audience. It was about being honest, about letting her own voice and experience shine through the sound. The host, who had started the evening with a sense of superiority and expectation, could do nothing but watch. He had thought he would control the moment, create a small spectacle, amuse himself and the crowd. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary, something that transcended the trivialities of status and expectation. He leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed on the piano, silently acknowledging the talent before him, perhaps even realizing that he had underestimated the woman completely. The room had become a shared experience in a way that few social gatherings ever achieved. Guests who had arrived as strangers, brought together only by circumstance, were now bound by the music, connected through their shared recognition of its beauty and depth. The music had created a temporary community, one where status and wealth held no weight, only the honesty of expression mattered. She could feel it, and it energized her further, adding subtle inflections, small variations in rhythm, gentle flourishes that carried even more emotion. Her fingers glided across the keys, with confidence and subtlety, shaping the narrative of the music. Each chord told a part of her story, moments of doubt, glimpses of hope, flashes of joy, and hints of sorrow. She allowed the rhythm to breathe, to expand naturally, to guide both herself and the audience through the ebb and flow of emotion. The melody rose and fell like waves, drawing the listeners along, pulling them into a world they had not anticipated but would not soon forget. She noticed that even the most skeptical guests were now fully absorbed. Some who had been quietly smirking at first had softened, their expressions betraying surprise, admiration, and even a sense of humility. The music had disarmed them, showing them a truth they could not ignore. Talent and authenticity do not ask for permission. They do not wait for recognition, and they can come from the most unexpected sources. Her body moved naturally with the music, subtle sways and gestures that emphasized emotion without drawing attention away from the sound. Her hands, guided by both practice and instinct, created a tapestry of notes that felt alive, breathing, and entirely human. She was aware of the audience only as part of the energy, not as critics or spectators, but as participants in the shared moment, feeling, breathing, and living the music alongside her. The melody began to shift again, becoming more reflective, carrying a sense of gentle introspection. She allowed herself to slow slightly, letting the notes linger, allowing the space between them to resonate with emotion. The audience responded intuitively, leaning in, holding their breath, letting themselves be carried by the subtlety and depth of the performance. It was a reminder that music is not just about speed or complexity, but about feeling, connection, and honesty. A few guests shifted subtly in their chairs, perhaps adjusting to take in the full depth of the sound. Some wiped at their eyes discreetly. Others exhaled slowly, a tension in their bodies softening. Every movement, every reaction confirmed what she already knew. The music was reaching them, touching them in ways words never could. It was a gift, shared freely, without expectation or demand, and it was transforming the evening. The last note faded into the air, lingering softly, as if the piano itself was reluctant to let go of the sound. The room remained silent for a moment, heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Guests were still, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and quiet reverence. No one moved, no one spoke, as if the music had suspended time and wrapped everyone in a shared understanding. She sat there, hands hovering just above the keys, letting the final echo settle, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She looked around the room, and for the first time since the evening began, she felt the full impact of what she had done. The laughter, the jokes, the expectations that had once felt like a weight pressing down on her were gone, replaced by something far more powerful: respect, admiration, and something almost intangible but deeply human: connection. She realized in that moment that the music had done more than capture attention. It had touched hearts, revealed vulnerability, and reminded everyone present of the beauty that could emerge when someone dared to be fully themselves. The host, who had orchestrated the evening with a sense of superiority, finally moved. He rose slowly from his seat, a hesitant but genuine smile spreading across his face. His eyes, once filled with smug amusement, now held a quiet acknowledgment. He approached her, not with condescension, but with respect. "That was incredible," he said softly, almost as if saying it aloud might break the spell of the moment. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of recognition she had longed for, not the kind born of obligation, but the kind born of true appreciation. A few guests began to clap, tentative at first, as if unsure whether it was appropriate to break the silence. But as the sound grew, more joined in, and soon the room was filled with genuine applause. It was not the polite, perfunctory clapping of a formal event. It was the kind that came from people moved, touched, and changed by something extraordinary. Each clap seemed to acknowledge not just her talent, but her courage, her resilience, and the authenticity she had brought into a room that had expected little. She stood slowly, a small, humble smile crossing her face. She had never sought attention, never craved recognition. But in that moment, she felt a quiet pride not in herself, but in what she had shared, in the human connection she had created through the music. She allowed herself a brief glance around the room, taking in the faces of people who had arrived as strangers, but were now witnesses to something unforgettable. Their expressions varied, some teary, some astonished, some quietly reflective, but all of them bore the unmistakable imprint of having been moved. A few guests approached her cautiously, almost shyly, as if unsure how to bridge the distance between admiration and conversation. One leaned in and said softly, "You have an incredible gift. I've never seen anything like this." Another added, "We thought this would be a light-hearted evening, but you changed everything." Their words were simple, but they carried the power of recognition, of validation, and of human connection. For her, it was a reminder that her years of quiet dedication had not been in vain, that her talent could touch people in ways she had only ever dreamed of. The host stepped back, watching the interactions unfold. He had initially believed this evening was about entertainment, a casual moment to amuse himself and others. Yet now he understood that it had become something far greater. He saw how her music had shifted the room, broken down social barriers, and created an experience that no amount of wealth or status could replicate. There was humility in his expression, a quiet acknowledgement that true talent and authenticity had no need for performance beyond themselves. She returned to the piano briefly, touching a few keys with gentle curiosity. It was not to play again, but to savor the instrument that had allowed her to share so much of herself. She remembered the small, battered piano from her childhood, the countless hours of practice, the solitude, the mistakes, and the triumphs. All of it had led to this moment where her music had become a bridge, a language understood without words, felt deeply without explanation. It was a reminder of the power of perseverance, of patience, and of believing in oneself even when no one else did. The audience seemed reluctant to leave the moment entirely. Some remained seated, eyes still fixed on the piano, reluctant to break the spell. Others whispered softly to one another, sharing the impact of the performance in hushed tones. The energy in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer about wealth, status, or social expectation. It was about human connection, about the power of authenticity, about the simple truth that someone willing to show their true self could change the atmosphere, the mood, and even the hearts of others. A few staff members, who had been quietly observing, approached her with smiles that mixed admiration and disbelief. They had seen her in the course of her regular work attentive, polite, diligent, but they had never seen this side of her. It was a revelation A reminder that people are often more than what they seem, that talent, passion, and courage can reside in the most unexpected places. Their quiet praise, unspoken in the beginning, now became visible acknowledgment of her brilliance. She noticed some of the younger guests lingering near the piano, their expressions a mix of wonder and inspiration. It was as if they had witnessed a possibility they had never considered, a reminder that talent does not always announce itself in expected ways. Some were taking mental notes, perhaps imagining their own hidden skills, their own passions that had yet to be revealed. She smiled faintly, realizing that this small act, her playing, might ripple beyond the room, inspiring others to take a chance on themselves. The host finally spoke again, this time addressing the entire room. His voice was measured, sincere, and carried an unexpected warmth. "I believe we have all witnessed something rare tonight," he said. "What we thought would be entertainment has turned into a lesson, a reminder that talent and courage often reside in places we least expect. Let us not forget this moment." There was a subtle pause, and he allowed the words to settle before continuing. "Tonight, we have been reminded that true beauty and power come from authenticity and dedication. Let us honor that." There was a renewed round of applause, this time more unified, more celebratory. It wasn't just for her skill, it was for what she represented: resilience, courage, authenticity, and the ability to connect with others through honest expression. The applause echoed through the room, warm and sincere, filling the space with a sense of closure, of acknowledgement, of gratitude. She allowed herself a final glance around the room, letting the moment sink in. It had been overwhelming at times, but in a good way, the kind that leaves a mark, that transforms, that becomes a memory to carry forward. She realized that this evening would stay with her for the rest of her life, not because of applause or recognition alone, but because of the genuine connection, the unspoken understanding, and the human energy that had been shared in a way that was rare and profound. Guests began to rise slowly, some approaching her to shake her hand, others offering kind words, some simply lingering in quiet admiration. Each interaction reinforced the significance of what had occurred. A simple act of courage, an honest expression of talent, had created ripples far beyond what anyone had expected. The evening had begun with low expectations, even ridicule, but it had transformed into a celebration of human potential, of authenticity, and of the power of art to bridge divides. She returned to her seat for a brief moment, touching the piano lightly, letting her fingers linger over the keys. It was a quiet moment of reflection, a way to honor the instrument that had carried her expression, and the room that had absorbed it so fully. She thought about her journey, the long hours of practice, the doubt, the solitude, the quiet hope that perhaps one day someone would notice. And now, here she was, having shared a piece of herself so completely, leaving an imprint that could not be erased. Some guests lingered by the windows, looking out at the city lights, their expressions thoughtful, as if the performance had unlocked something within them. Others remained seated, replaying the music in their minds, savoring the emotional journey they had been taken on. It was clear that the evening had left an indelible mark, a shared human experience that would remain long after they left the room. The host approached her one last time, offering a hand and a smile. "Thank you," he said simply, his tone sincere. "Tonight was unforgettable, and it's because of you." She nodded quietly, understanding that the evening had become more than she could have imagined. It was not about status, nor about wealth, nor about any expectation imposed on her. It was about courage, honesty, and the quiet power of sharing one's true self. She stepped back from the piano and allowed herself to take a deep breath. The room had been transformed by a simple, yet profound act by someone choosing to be themselves and to express that through music. It was a reminder that human potential often resides in unexpected places, that courage and talent can emerge in ways that surprise even the most experienced observers. And in that moment, she felt a sense of completeness, a quiet fulfillment, and a recognition that she had made a difference in ways she would never fully know. As the evening came to a close, the guests began to leave, their conversations subdued, reflective. The music had left an imprint on their he,